Hi everyone, Brian here, and in today's video I plan to go over 4 key loophole bonuses that are available with 𝐼𝐵onds. I'll review how to maximize the rates that are available today by leveraging the gift option, then I'll discuss how to minimize the penalty for early withdrawal, which happens to be forfeiting 3 months worth of interest when you withdraw the funds prior to the 5-year mark. Next, I'll review how you can buy more than the $10,000 limit. Then I'll follow that up by explaining how an 𝐼𝐵ond can be excluded from both your state and your federal taxes, and then I'll finish it off by explaining how the latest rate of 6.89% is actually better than last year's 9.62%. And many of you may think that that is completely impossible, but I can explain the logic behind why in just a bit. First off, if you're new to my channel, I cover personal finance and business related topics that I've learned over the years as I climbed the corporate ladder with companies such as Target and Amazon. And then I managed to recently retire in my 40s. But I am not a financial advisor or a CPA, and I highly recommend that you consult with a professional before you make any major changes with your investments. Let's begin the video by going over how to buy more than the $10,000 limit per social security number, and it truly comes down to only 3 options. The first being that you can buy paper 𝐼𝐵onds up to $5,000 with your tax return. But if you file a joint tax return with your spouse, you can only purchase up to $5,000 in 𝐼𝐵onds from your combined tax return. And because it's a joint return, you can't buy $5,000 each. It's just per return. And there's going to be a few people that will comment that if you have a return of $5,000 in your taxes, that you probably aren't managing your taxes efficiently. And I believe that there's a few arguments against that form of thought. The first being that given the year that we just had with stocks being down substantially, I would expect that most people would take advantage of stock loss harvesting, where you sell some of your stock to realize the loss, which allows you to improve your overall tax position at the end of the year. Another way that a person could ensure that they have a $5,000 tax return or more is to manually pay into your taxes. A person can choose to pay their own taxes on a quarterly basis on a Form 1040-ES, where you could overpay your taxes by $5,000 at the end of the year. Another option is to file an automatic extension for your taxes and have a one-time payment of $5,000 towards last year's taxes. You would do this even if you didn't need the extension, but it has to be completed before the tax cutoff of mid-April and completed on the IRS Direct Pay site. These are all options where I highly suggest you have professional guidance to ensure it is all done correctly. And I'm not sure how many people will actually go to this extreme, but it is available to you. The second and third option for buying more than the $10,000 limit per social security number is to buy 𝐼𝐵onds under a revocable trust or under an LLC. And I certainly wouldn't suggest that anyone create these entities just to buy more 𝐼𝐵onds, but it is available to you if you already have these entities. But I would venture to say that many of you should already have your own LLC. If you have a side job that incurs any expense that also brings in a little extra cash, then you should already own an LLC. And I'll provide a real-world example. My friend's father is retired and he refs basketball games for extra cash. Plus, it keeps him extremely fit. Throughout the basketball season, he's driving all over the state reffing these games where they pay him a set fee, but they're not paying him for his mileage, his sneakers, his uniforms, or even the ice packs for when he pulls a muscle. He mentioned that he's making about $5,000 a year from reffing these games, and when he looked at his expenses, it was obvious that he could more than make up in tax savings what he would be paying in the $100 fee in setting up his LLC. And under this LLC, he could then purchase his own $10,000 set of 𝐼𝐵onds over and above what he had bought against his own personal social security number. A person could have multiple legitimate LLCs where they could buy an additional $10,000 in 𝐼𝐵onds if they wanted. Before moving on to the next section, I have a favor to ask of you. If you enjoy my content, please press the like button so my channel can grow. And better yet, consider subscribing so you can be up to date with all my latest content. And with that covered, the next section to discuss is how to minimize the withdrawal penalty of 3 months worth of interest being forfeit, and it all comes down to timing. Interest on 𝐼𝐵onds is accrued and paid out at the beginning of each month. And with that in mind, it doesn't matter if you buy your 𝐼𝐵onds on the 2nd day of the month or the 28th day of the month. You'll still be getting paid the same amount. The same is true when you sell your 𝐼𝐵ond. It doesn't matter if you sell it on the 2nd day or the 28th day of the month, you still get paid the same. And for this reason, it is in your best interest to buy 𝐼𝐵onds at the end of the month and sell them at the beginning of the month. Me personally, I would play it a little bit safe and I would buy and sell them probably with about a 5-day buffer on each side, because it does take a day or two for paperwork to clear. And let's be honest, it is the government. By taking this simple approach, you're effectively making the withdrawal penalty closer to a 1-month loss of interest rather than a full 3 months. Clearly, this is not going to make you rich, but every bit helps, and it doesn't take that much effort to do. The next section to cover is how to maximize higher I-bond rates that are available today if you expect the rates to go down substantially in the next year or two. Let's make the assumption that you and your spouse leverage I-bonds as part of your investment strategy. Let's assume that you each have your own LLC. In this made-up scenario, the I-bond rate today is 6.89%, but you fully expect that the rates in 2 years will drop down to about 3%, and they're going to remain that way for several years. As of today, you and your spouse each buy one another a $10,000 gift of I-bonds. Now, when you gift an I-bond, it does count towards the other person's total allotment of $10,000 for that year that they receive the gift. You can buy the gift and let it sit in your account building interest at the rates that you had bought it at until the date when you physically gift it to their account. Meaning you could sit on it for years, building up interest until you gift it to that person in a year where the rates have gone down. And based on when you bought them, they began to accrue the interest at 6.89% when it was originally purchased. And no, the interest earned does not count towards a person's max gift of $10,000. And yes, you can make multiple $10,000 gift purchases for the same person. And leveraging the gift option can allow you to buy a great deal more I-bonds today at the higher rate where you continue to let the interest accrue. And when they are physically gifted and received by the other person, then they have an I-bond that counts towards that year's total allotment of $10,000. But at this point, it has already grown multiple times more than if you simply waited to buy the I-bonds in that given year. Now, at the beginning of this example, I did mention that each spouse had an LLC. Does that mean that they could also gift themselves $10,000 to and from the LLC? And that answer is no, you can't. Gifting is restricted to only individuals. Businesses and trusts are not allowed to give or receive gifted I-bonds. The next area to review is how you can have your I-bonds excluded from federal and state taxes. And there's only one way that I'm aware of, and that is if you put the I-bond proceeds towards higher education. But there is a catch. The person that cashes in the I-bond must be 24 years or older and also needs to complete an IRS Form 8815 to show that the I-bond withdrawal and the higher education expenses all occurred in the same tax year. To me, this is a very odd feature to have because you can't gift I-bonds to your children and then have them use those I-bonds to pay for their higher education costs if they happen to be younger than 24. And the person that's withdrawing the I-bond to pay for the higher education expenses can only do so for a direct dependent or a spouse. So if you're a grandparent where the child is not your direct dependent living with you, you can't withdraw an I-bond and put it towards that grandkid's college expenses. In addition to all that, your modified adjusted gross income must be below $100,800 if you're single, and less than $158,650 if you're married filing jointly. My point is that it's not cut and dry, but this is an option to use for using I-bonds towards college without paying any state or federal taxes. And the last section that I'm going to cover is how an I-bond rate at 6.89% is actually better than 9.62%. I know that doesn't seem possible, but stick with me. As you may recall, the rate for an I-bond is a composite rate that's comprised of a fixed rate and a semi-annual inflation rate. The fixed rate sticks with an I-bond the entire life of that I-bond, and the inflation part of the equation is adjusted every 6 months in May and November. I believe that most all of you are probably genuinely aware of that part about I-bonds. And the key difference between last year's I-bond that was at 9.62% and today's rate at 6.89% is the fixed rate of that equation. Last year, the fixed rate was at 0%, and the fixed rate today is at 0.4%. The fixed rate at 0.4% will stay with that I-bond for its entire life. So in about 4 years, the I-bond that was bought at 6.89% will be outperforming an I-bond that was bought last year at 9.62% due solely to the fixed rate when the I-bonds were purchased. In some of my other videos, I do speak to the long-term and the short-term strategy with I-bonds. And when you have a fixed rate that's added to an I-bond composite rate, it makes it much more worthwhile to hold it for the long term. In looking at this chart that Treasury Direct has on their site, it tells you what the historical rates on I-bonds have been since 1998. On the left is the fixed rate, and on the bottom is the semi-annual inflation rate. When you marry up the two sections, it tells you your current rate. In looking at the chart, if you bought an I-bond in June 2000, the fixed rate was at 3.6%, and that fixed rate is attached to the I-bond for its entire life. So even if inflation was at 0%, you'd still get 3.6% on your I-bond. Now, if you bought an I-bond last month, you would have a rate of 6.89%. But an I-bond bought in 2000 would have a rate of 10.2% at this same time period, all because of the fixed rate in 2000 was at 3.6%, and it's added to today's inflation rate to get a much higher return. So even though you may have thought that you missed out on all of those great rates on I-bonds last year, you can rejoice in the fact that in 4 years, an I-bond that's bought today is going to be outperforming those other high I-bond rates from last year. That concludes my video on some of the loophole bonuses with I-bonds, and I hope you were able to get some value out of today's video. Thanks for watching.